This is Professor Tatum here for our first lecture for History 1301. This will kind of lay out the foundations for how our lectures will work moving forward, and it will also give us an idea of what we're doing with this class. All right, we're going to look at what history is as a field of study, and also consider why we should care, what this means to us, and what we can be getting out of this. Now, I'd imagine most of you are not history majors, but I promise you there are benefits to taking this class, and I'm hoping we can see some of those throughout this lecture. So moving forward, all of our lectures will have an overview like this to show you what to expect moving forward. And what we'll be looking at here is what history is. That'll be a bit of context. Each lecture moving forward will have some kind of context. Then we'll look at why we should care about history and see how it is beneficial to people of all majors. And then we'll look at some different interpretations of history that are prevalent throughout our course here as examples of how historical interpretations are flexible and something that do change over time. All right, so when I'm asking here, what is history? I'm not asking about the past, what happened in the past. I'm talking about the discipline, the study, the field of history. What does it mean to be a student in a history class? What subject are we investigating here? I understand history to be a series of interpretations that help us understand and explain the past, okay? And understanding history really requires us to ask a lot of questions. So sometimes we'll ask questions like who, what, where, when, okay? Who was involved? What was happening? Where was this? What time period? The bigger questions that really drive historical interpretations are those deep ones, the why, the how. Why did this happen the way that it did? How does point A here lead to point B? Why was this guy such an asshole? And how did that impact the way that he approached certain scenarios? But before getting straight into one's interpretation, it is crucial for historians to set some kind of context, meaning essentially setting the stage, providing some historical background of what you're trying to interpret, okay? This requires answering those who, what, where, and when questions, okay? Who's going to be involved here? What topic are we talking about? Where is this happening? And more or less in what time period? Understanding those things can help make our interpretations, the why and how, make a little more sense. Okay, and when we write essays for our class, this is exactly what I'm going to want to see. I want to see you provide me some context, tell me who, what, when, where generally we're talking about, and then provide me an interpretation through your thesis. We'll talk about all that more as we move forward. All right, so let's try to understand historical interpretations. A lot of people will try to tell you that having conflicting interpretations is people changing our history, right? And there's this big kind of idea out there that schools are changing our history, and us college professors, we're the worst. We're just trying to ruin the past and change what happened through history. We're rewriting history. Well, I'd hope people continue to update history, okay? We're trying to interpret and understand and explain it in different ways, all right? We're not arguing about what happened, we just understand it differently, okay? My interpretation as an educated individual in the 21st century who's been through a master's program in history in the 21st century is going to be far different than, say, your dad's high school coach who taught him history, okay? The historical interpretations must meet a few criteria to really be taken seriously, all right? Number one, a good historical interpretation must be contestable, meaning that other historians can either agree with it or disagree with it, okay, based on the evidence that they're exploring, okay, because that's another key to historical interpretations. They're not just your thoughts and feelings. They can involve some of that, but they need to be strictly based on the evidence that you're exploring, okay? We want to keep them grounded as much as possible in evidence. All right, so that leads us to another question. What type of evidence do historians explore? Historians use multiple types of evidence. We try to rely pretty heavily on what we call primary sources, meaning sources being studied in the period. This can include things like newspapers, letters, diaries, photographs, firsthand accounts of historical events. But we also look pretty frequently into secondary sources. Okay, this is where us historians kind of have discourse with each other. These are sources created after the time that we're studying, where us historians ourselves provide our interpretations based on the primary evidence we're exploring or the other secondary sources that we're putting into conversation with each other, okay? This includes things like monographs, meaning a historical book based on our research and interpretations of that research, biographies of historical figures, journal articles, documentaries, podcasts, all of these things where people after the time that we're studying are exploring a topic are considered secondary sources. All right. And a good historian will use a little bit of both of these in making a historical interpretation. Now, one thing that's crucial as we study history is to be able to have empathy without necessarily having sympathy. All right. To be able to be empathetic even when you're not sympathetic. Now, what do I mean by that? It's important for us to be able to understand and observe a topic and really try to get to an understanding of why things happen the way they did and how one thing impacts another without letting our personal opinions about it get in the way of understanding it. Okay. We also need to understand that just because we're exploring something and trying to understand it doesn't mean we have to agree with it at all. Okay. So, as an example, I like to use pretty frequently, a lot of my studies in grad school were about indigenous peoples, Native Americans. Um, and I can very well sit here and explain Andrew Jackson's reasoning behind or at least his justification behind the Indian removal policy. Okay. And why he thought it was a good idea, or at least expressed that it was a good idea to forcefully remove groups like the Cherokees from their homeland. Now, does that mean I agree with what Jackson did? Not at all. I find it despicable, okay? But I can still not allow my disagreement with Jackson there to interfere with my understanding of his policies and why he did what he did, or at least how he justified what he did. See what I mean? That's what we need to do as we're studying history. All right, so there's a lot of common misconceptions about history. If any of you happen to be a history major, you're going to find that anytime somebody first discovers that you're a history major, they want to sit there and play trivia with you. They want to test you and drop some little facts they expect you to be impressed with. Because a lot of people assume that history is just a lot of names and dates and fun facts, which it is not, okay? I don't care that Abraham Lincoln's top hat was yay inches tall and that he only got top hats from X and X company, or that Ulysses X Grant only smoked this type of cigar. Well, that one I might want to know so I can try it myself, but that's a different story. Point I'm getting at, if we're going to be including that kind of little information, it has to be helping us get to a bigger picture, all right? It has to help us understand and explain. Now, if we have names, dates, events, and things that can work as evidence, that's one thing. But just knowing all these little facts isn't very helpful. Okay. By that standard, history is not trivial. Okay. It should never be something that we consider to be just having the information for the sake of knowing it. All right. Trivia is good, fun, and fine. I love playing the question of day on the Alexa. I used to do it every night. I've kind of lost the habit. But trivia is good, great, fun, and fine, but it is not equated to the study of history. Okay, so let all these ideas of history out the door as you approach our class. All right, so we have somewhat of an understanding of what it means to study history, but why should we care? Okay, why are we doing this, and why are we all required in the state of Texas to take history classes, even if we're nothing near a history major? There's a few reasons. Now, of course, understanding our past and where we come from and how that's shaped who we are is very important, but that's secondary compared to some of the skills that we practice in the study of history that'll benefit anybody of any major and what no matter what your career path is that you're following. Okay. So one thing we do a lot of as we study history is reading and writing. All right. So we got to exercise effective reading and writing skills in order to be successful in history. And if you're wondering what that has to do with you and how that's going to benefit you, just take a look here. Anybody, regardless of what plans you have as far as careers go, no matter what your major is, you're going to need some kind of skills in reading and writing. Okay, so I've broken down just a few here. If you're in the medical field, all right, if that's something you're working toward, you're going to need to be able to read and write patient charts, prescriptions, side effects, medical articles, hospital and clinic policies. You're going to need to understand government regulations that you're going to have to be able to read about. And you're going to be able to need to write patient referrals and care plans. I get a lot of students from science and engineering thinking, well, what does this have to do with me? Okay, science. You guys need to be reading and writing articles on recent scientific studies, right? Staying updated. Also, may need to be writing some proposals for funding. Okay. Engineers, you guys need to be looking at blueprints, construction contracts, permits, manuals, company policies, government regulations. All right, point I'm getting at here. The reading and writing skills we're practicing as we study history will be beneficial to all of you. Okay. And really, if we think about it, studying history is a lot like exercise. Okay. I remind my classes as we get through the semester, and I can kind of tell people are burning out a little bit. I say, guys, remember what we're doing here. We're exercising. Okay. We're exercising essential skills that are going to be crucial to our success in our other classes and in our professions and even perhaps in our personal lives. Okay. So, regardless of what you're doing, some of the things we're practicing in this class will be helpful for you. In addition to the reading and writing skills we'll be practicing, we're going to be considering different types of perspective, using evidence to understand those perspectives. We'll also be practicing empathy, even when we're not sympathetic. My Lord, does the world need more of that? As well as critical thinking, something that is kind of going to the wayside as we throw away our critical thinking skills to things like AI. Now, AI can be very helpful and useful in different ways, though not permitted to be used in this classroom for important reasons. But we should never allow it to replace our ability to critically think and make decisions for ourselves and do research and come to learn things on our own. Another crucial skill we're practicing as we study history is making rational interpretations or assessments based on evidence. Okay, again, this is something no matter what career path you take, you're going to need to do. Scientists, how does the scientific method work, right? You've got to make your hypothesis, right? And you got to observe some evidence. You got to get data based on that evidence, and you got to assess that evidence. That's what we're doing with history. We're looking at evidence, assessing it, making interpretations accordingly, okay? Medical field, once again, bring you guys up. You have a patient come in, whether you're a doctor or a nurse, you've got to observe some evidence. You got to listen to what that patient's telling you. You got to read their charts. You got to check their vitals and observe. You got to see their symptoms. And then you've got to observe all that evidence together to make an assessment of what might be wrong with this patient, okay, in order to provide a diagnosis. So, a lot of these skills we're practicing, though it may not seem like it in the moment, are going to greatly benefit you along the way. Another thing we're doing is demonstrating our interpretations and assessment through discussion and writing. Okay, again, something that'll be very helpful for a lot of you as you move forward throughout your education and definitely into your professional lives. And please don't be one of those people who just says, well, we can just use AI. I don't need to get good at reading and writing and understanding things. I'll just type my question into the robot and let it think for me. All right. That's getting fake exercise. That's like being SpongeBob here with the anchor arms. And eventually, those anchor arms are going to whoop out on you, and you're really going to be struggling in comparison to somebody else who has been going through this process and taking this seriously and learning how to read and write and critically think. We need to be mindful, though, that what you get out of your study of history is going to largely be based on what you put into it. All right. So if you're just kind of coming into class every now and then, skipping most classes, and then you go try to just Google half the answers for the review, and when I'm asking questions in class, you have no idea what's going on because you haven't been doing the readings and watching the videos, you're probably not going to get much out of this, and you're going to get bored very quickly. Or if you come in here just thinking, okay, how do I just get the A without having to learn anything from this? You're going to get bored very quickly. But if you come in here and you say, I am here to participate, I'm here to learn, I'm here to grow, I promise you, I will help you as much as I can along the way. All right. That ties into my teaching philosophy, which is I care about all of you. I want you all to succeed. I'll do what I can to help you, guide you, get you going. At the same time, I cannot care more than you. All right. It's up to you to be there doing your part, seeking that support in order to get it. Okay. Another reason we should study history comes down to the need in our present day world for educated individuals. Okay. Um, I can't play this video on the Zoom, unfortunately, because we won't get audio. But I would strongly recommend you guys to take a few minutes to watch this thing. This is a fantastic video I play every semester for my classes. This is a video geared actually toward high school AP history students who are earning college credits while they're in high school. But everything the speaker in this video has to say is very relevant to any students of history in the 21st century. Okay, so let's look at some examples of some conflicting or changing historical interpretations. I do want to say, by the way, we do frequently look at historical interpretations as something that kind of grow, develop, or evolve over time. But even within certain periods of time, there are historians giving all kinds of arguments and counter arguments to one another about their historical interpretations based on how they interpret the evidence. Okay. So it's not even linear either. It's not that this is what we interpret one year and then a few years later we interpret it like this. All along the way, there are historians offering suggestions of different ways we can interpret and understand the evidence. So keep that in mind as we look at these examples. Okay. First example I want to look to is the sale of Manhattan. Manhattan, of course, is an island in New York. This island now has some of the most valuable real estate in the country. And what happened here was when some Dutch traders arrived, they approached the indigenous peoples living on this island and they made a deal with them saying, we would like to purchase this island, and purchased it for somewhere around $20 worth of wampum. Wampum just refers to some beads and trinkets that to Europeans had very little value, right? So this purchase of Manhattan Island really helps us consider the significance of perspective when interpreting history, all right, and when studying history. If we consider only the European perspective, which historians predominantly had for quite some time, it looks as if this was a steal of a deal for the Europeans, all right? They think, well, these, in their perspective, not mine, quote unquote, savages are too dumb to know the value of money. They just practically gave away this valuable land to us because they're so backward and they don't know any better, all right? And that's kind of been the long-standing interpretation that these Europeans were so advanced and so superior that they understood the value of land so much more than these people, and that's why they were able to get it for such a good price. But if we consider the indigenous people's perspective, they see this a lot differently. They see land as something that cannot be owned. They don't believe in things like private property where somebody has an inherent right to a certain chunk of land, and that is that one individual's land. They believe land is something that is communally owned. Now they believe that different nations and different bands of people have certain tracts of land that they hold sacred, or perhaps that they hunt on or that they live on, and they're going to do what they can to protect that land communally. But they don't believe that land is something that can be owned in a sense that you can put a price tag on it and buy it and sell it. All right. So to them, this is like somebody coming up and saying, hey, there's some real nice air you're breathing over there. I really would like some of that air. So I'll tell you what if I give you $20 for all that air you're breathing around your head? You're going to say, okay, sure. You're going to take that $20 and say, what an idiot. You can't buy air. That's something that we cannot put a physical price tag on. It's something that we freely breathe, right? That's the way they saw this here. They thought this land was something you could not purchase. So they thought, okay, sure, you want to give us $20 worth of wampum? What do we got to lose? You own the land now, quote unquote, idiots. All right. So it's a matter of perspective. And depending on whose perspective we're viewing this through, we're seeing a very different interpretation of what happened here. Right. It's not that anyone's changing the history saying this did or did not happen. We, yes, agree there was this exchange of $20 more or less of wampum for Manhattan Island. But what that meant depends on whose perspective we're considering. Another great example of conflicting interpretations of history are how we understand the Comanches in the Southwest Borderlands region. The traditional interpretation has been that the Comanches were a barrier to imperial expansion in the Southwest. All right, they said that the Spanish and the French were unable to move into certain territories because the Comanches were there. They were this big, brutal barrier that prevented these empires from expanding into that region. But more contemporary interpretation, proposed by a historian named Pekka Hämäläinen and continued by other historians, myself included, is that we can actually understand the Comanches as a sort of empire for themselves, all right? And that requires breaking past this idea of them being inherently inferior to these European empires surrounding them, right? If we look at, say, the Spanish Empire and the French Empire in North America, we don't say, oh, the Spanish were unable to colonize up into this area because there was this barrier there in Louisiana. No, we say that that's where the French Empire was, and it's separate from the Spanish Empire, but they're both distinct empires. All right. And so, if we can see the Comanches at an equal human level, we could say perhaps this is where the Comanche Empire's domain was. All right, Comancheria, it was called. It's not that they're a barrier to European expansion. They just have their own imperial claims in the region. It takes a bit of willingness to take on different types of perspectives to recognize the Comanches as an empire, because they don't have, as many critics point out, a centralized ruler or emperor. Um, they did not leave behind any kind of permanent monuments or anything like that. There's no evidence that they ever used the word empire to describe themselves. All right. And for these reasons, a lot of historians push back against using that word empire. All right. And that's fine if we don't want to use the word empire. But what we can see is the Comanches in many ways worked like an empire. Okay. They expanded into this region. And they built themselves on a form of conquest by conquering and absorbing other societies into their own. And they were a very powerful political force in the region. Furthermore, there does seem to be some sort of tribute paid to the Comanches in a sense. In order to remain diplomatic relations with the Comanches, both other indigenous groups and Europeans would follow the kind of custom relations with indigenous peoples of giving gifts to the Comanches. And in many cases, as the Comanches wanted to keep their influence in the region, they would force people to bring them more and more gifts. We can see this in a sense of them charging tribute to people around them to stay in their good graces. Again, not all historians are on board with this concept of the Comanches as an empire, but we can all recognize that they are a very powerful nation of people, okay? And that they are a nation, they are a society, and that they have their own experiences and their own political influence over this region of Comancheria. Even if it's not centralized, there is a sense of politics at play there. And this definitely requires us to look at the Comanches as more than just a barrier to these other empires. They are a nation of their own that exists within this region. I could go on and on about this. I find this to be such a fascinating topic. Anybody else is interested in learning more about the Comanches, have office hours with me. We'll talk it out. All right, another example we can see of a historical topic that we'll be looking at pretty early on in our class that has conflicting interpretations is the Pueblo revolts. So what happened here with the Pueblo revolts is in Spanish New Mexico by 1680, the colony had pretty much been on its way out for some time. There were some people telling the Spanish government, we need to just give up on this colony and shut it down. It's just a big hole in our pocket. But the reason the Spanish kept this colony going is because they were very successful in their missionary work in the region, right? And the Franciscans, who were the order of friars in the region who were spreading Christianity to the native people there, convinced the Spanish crown that it was worth holding on to New Mexico because they were having so much success with their religious ventures in New Mexico. But also in 1680, several groups of native peoples in the area, referred to collectively as Pueblos, staged this mass attack on the Spanish in the region, doing things like destroying their missions and destroying religious artifacts and executing many of the priests, as well as others who were settled in the region. And once again, historians are arguing over whether or not this happened. We can agree on. But what we debate is what caused this thing. Why did it happen, right? What factors were at play that inspired this Pueblo revolt, right? And which of those factors are most significant and should be considered to be the major cause or causes of the Pueblo revolts. And I'm not going to break this one down for you guys. I'm going to have y'all tell me. So for your first reading assignment, different students will be reading different passages from different historians, providing conflicting interpretations of the causes of the Pueblo revolts. For more information on the breakdown of which reading you should be covering and how exactly you will be presenting your understanding of the cause of the Pueblo revolt according to what the historian you're reading from had to say, look into our Unit 1 reading video quiz module on Canvas, and you'll see what you need to do there. If there's any confusion about which essay you need to read or what you need to be doing with that, please email me. I'll be glad to help you out and get you on the right track. Just be sure to do so sooner than later so that you can get this completed on time. Remember, the goal of readings and videos like this is to have these completed by the start of the next week so that we can use them moving forward in that next set of lectures. All right, guys, I'm going to go ahead and break it here. This gives us a pretty good overview of what history is, why we should care, and a few examples to show us how it all works. Here you get to get your hands a little dirty, look through some historical interpretations, and we'll have a discussion on them to see where we see similarities and differences, and see that we're not seeing really anybody saying anything did or did not happen that we have factual evidence for. We're simply saying these are different ways we can understand and explain the past, which is, once again, the definition of the study of history.